Hello. So let's take a look at internal and external validity issues that you can have in your experimental designs. This is going to be kind of a quick fire vocabulary section. Most of the validity issues are pretty simple and straightforward, but they're so easy to have problems with if you're not considering them, if you're not aware that they might be an issue. So let's get started. First, we've got maturity or maturation. Maturation is a validity concern dealing with what happens over time. Remember in the first section we mentioned that 2 months of time can be a lot of time for second grade boys. And so in 2 months you could have an entire classroom simply mature and become less rowdy. Maturation doesn't necessarily have to do with changes in time due to age. It can be changes in time just due to anything. A scientist researching um, how do pumpkins grow can have maturation effects because the different seasons went by, or because simply people get better. A very common issue with research in depression or medical situations is that most people get better over time. I know it doesn't sound crazy, it doesn't sound super ridiculous, but so if you're feeling depressed, more likely than not, after a month or a couple of months, you will feel better. And so you have to be careful about those maturation effects when you're doing research. Same thing with anyone who's sick. If you have a sore toe and you say, well, maybe the thing is that these shoes are not good, so I'm going to stop wearing these shoes, then you feel better. Did you have reduced pain because you changed your shoes, or because maybe your toe just got better? You can actually hurt the tendons and nerves in your toes very easily. I have to be careful when I'm sleeping. If I let my feet get too cold overnight, I can have really bad uh, nerve pain. And so you might have thought that it was the shoes, but it could have just been your toe healing on its own that changed that result. So there's a maturation concern. History concern, very relatedly, is anything that happens that can affect your research kind of in the world. So if people were doing stress research, how stressed are people, and they just happen to have been doing that around 9/11, 2001, you can imagine that the event of 9/11 could be an incredibly stressful event, and so that history event could cause an effect on your research. When I was in college, I knew a faculty member. When I was in my PhD, I knew a faculty member who did research on stress associated to violence. And one semester, the university took a vote and decided that they were going to start allowing concealed carry firearms on campus. And if you had a certain part of the campus where you weren't allowed to have the concealed carry firearm, you had to put these giant posters, these giant signs with pictures of guns on them saying you can't have a gun past this point. Now, uh, there was a concern that because people suddenly started seeing these signs in a giant weapon, if you were dealing with someone who had PTSD or was concerned about gun safety or something like that, seeing that sign right before they came into the research lab could affect their results on the study. And so you have to be aware of history. It's one of those things that seems super obvious, but that can affect your results, that can cause changes to your results. And interestingly, if research has been done, let's say you had research done in the 60s, it's possible that something about culture in the 60s made that research come out the way it did, and if you did that research again now in the 2020s, it would come out differently just because culture is different now, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to point out one specific thing that caused that change, but it would still be there. So there's your history concerns. Next up, selection and mortality effects. These are pretty straightforward. Selection effects, you may be familiar with. It's whenever your research comes out one way or another depending on who participates. Now we know that we should have random participation, and we should randomly assign our participants to different groups in our experiments. But one thing you have to be careful about is that participants are always given the choice to leave the experiment of their own free will at any time. So if you're doing research like my research that involves asking students in a classroom to tell us how well they think they're going to do on a test, we always have to give the students the option to quit out of the study at any time during the entire semester. And we also have to deal with the fact that students don't always come to class and they don't always take their tests. And so we have to deal with the issue that maybe we're only getting the best students. Maybe only the best students are willing to show off their test scores for our research. Maybe only the students that actually show up to most classes are being shown in our data, and that can affect our results. Similarly, a mortality effect comes into play usually when you're working with long-term studies or research involving older adults. The idea being that, or the concern being that if people die during your research study, the people who live or survive are going to be more represented in your study than the people who die. Not necessarily. So there's a study involving the marshmallow effect. The marshmallow effect was that young children are presented with a marshmallow and they're told, if you wait for 10 minutes without eating this marshmallow, I'm going to give you 2 marshmallows. And so the finding was that a lot of the young children who were able to hold on to those marshmallows and so they could get the second one also did better in school, and they had better careers, and they had healthier bodies later in life. But one thing that was an issue there is that, well, a lot of the poorer people died off or moved away for work, and so the people that were presenting their health information or their career information towards the end of that 40-year study were children that were wealthy uh, in their childhood and went on to have good educations and went on to have healthier lifestyles, probably because they were wealthier as children. They had better educated parents. They lived in better parts of town. So you got to be careful about these selection and mortality effects that can really affect your research, even though you're not necessarily aware that they can be. Another big one is our experimenter effects. An experimenter effect is simply an effect where whoever is doing the research, whatever researcher is in the room, can affect your results. I actually had a concern with one of my studies where I had a research assistant that was really nice, very friendly, very talkative. She was very pretty, and she was so engaging. People absolutely loved her. Anyone who talked to her fell in love with her. And so there was an issue where we were concerned that she was so nice that people were trying harder on their tests. They were being more honest when they were reporting some opinions about things, and so we were getting different results because this person was such a nice experimenter compared to other experimenters which were professional but maybe not nearly as engaging. Of course, you can always have an experimenter effect uh, uh, of, say, a person who doesn't really care. They're not watching you carefully, so you don't do everything you're supposed to. You do need to be careful about experimenter effects associated with race and gender and age. If you're doing research study about how well can older adults use computers, you may have to be aware that putting a college student as their experimenter can make them feel inadequate, make them feel like they can't use computers, and so they might not try as hard, or they might not do as well. So experimenter effects are, again, something that you might not realize can affect your results, but you have to be careful about that. Okay, so in the next section we'll talk about some things we can do to improve validity, to deal with those issues in this previous section. Once again, I hope it's been enjoyable.